All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into the Duterte administration. We're looking at the key achievements between 2016 and 2022.
Yeah.
So we've got a whole bunch of research here that we've compiled. We're trying to extract, I guess, the most significant progress across various sectors.
Right.
The sources really cover a lot. We've got infrastructure, the economy, social development, peace and order, governance, and the whole response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's quite a wide range.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. But I think a good place to start would be the big one everyone always talks about is like build, build, build program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was sort of the hallmark, I think, of the administration's focus on infrastructure development.
Sure.
And I think that's a good place to start because it's the most visible, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess maybe roads are the first thing that comes to mind when you think about that.
Absolutely. And I think the numbers kind of speak for themselves.
Yeah.
We're talking about over 40,000 kilometers of roads upgraded or built.
Wow, that's a lot. That's more than
That's a lot of roads.
driving across the U.S.
Right. That's a huge amount of investment in infrastructure.
Yeah. And, I mean, they were really going for it. It's over 3,000 kilometers of tourism roads, specifically, and then almost 1,000 kilometers leading to, like, industrial areas.
It's very targeted.
Yeah. And it makes sense when you start to think about some of the specific projects. You have the Boracay Circumferential Road, which is, obviously supposed to boost tourism in a big way.
Yeah, it's a key destination.
And then the Samara Pacific Coastal Road, which I think is a really interesting one, connecting communities that were previously very isolated.
So improving connectivity and accessibility.
Yeah. And the, TPLEX, that's the Tarlac-Pangasinan Line Union Expressway, I believe.
Right.
Which is a major artery, I guess, for trade and stuff, continues to be improved. So it really does seem like they were trying to connect different parts of the archipelago, which makes sense.
It does. And it wasn't just roads. We also saw a lot of investment in bridge construction as well.
Yeah, the bridges, 6,854 of them in total.
A lot of bridges.
Which is amazing. And, you think about some of the mega bridges in Metro Manila, like the Estrella Pantaleon Bridge and the BGC Ortigas Bridge.
These are really changing the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, those are aimed at, they're part of this Metro Manila logistics infrastructure network, which is supposed to ease congestion, but they're massive projects.
Right.
And then you've got, ones like the Panguil Bay Bridge, which is connecting, different regions.
Which was a huge undertaking.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, like, some of these Metro Manila projects, they did get some Chinese funding.
Right.
So that's an interesting aspect of it as well. But, I mean, those bridges are so important, right? Like, not just for daily commutes, but also for that long-term economic integration, right?
Absolutely. You got to move people and goods.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then you can't talk about connectivity in the Philippines without thinking about air and sea travel as well, right? So there were 248 airport projects that were completed.
That's a lot of airports.
Including, upgrades to Bicol International Airport, Bohol Panglao, Clark, and then rehabilitation of Sangley Point.
Right. And then on the maritime side, we also had a significant number of port projects.
Yeah.
579 commercial and social tourism ports.
That's a lot of boats.
A lot of boats.
I mean, that's really got to be good for tourism and trade.
For sure. Improving access and potentially lowering transportation costs.
And, it's an island nation, so it's kind of essential.
It's pretty important.
But it's not just about getting around, right? There's also the essential area of flood management and water security.
Absolutely.
And they completed over 13,000 flood control projects, which is, that's a huge number.
That's a big deal, especially in a country that's prone to typhoons and flooding.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, one of the key achievements for Metro Manila specifically was the completion of that 6.3-kilometer Ongat Water Transmission Improvement Project tunnel.
That was a big one.
Which is, that's the water supply for, a major urban center.
Absolutely. So it was a really important project for ensuring the sustainability of the city.
Yeah, very important. And, moving on to social development, I think it's worth highlighting that the administration provided assistance for over 336,000 housing units.
That's a significant number of people being housed.
Yeah. And that's I mean that's a pretty significant average each year. And I think it's important to note that 118 of those projects were specifically for indigenous communities.
Right, so addressing a specific need.
Yeah, definitely. And then, we can't forget about the digital front. So the National Broadband Program, they achieved 73.5% completion in their initial phase. And that resulted in almost 8,000 free Wi-Fi sites that are operational now.
So that's a big expansion of access to the internet.
Yeah. And the BCDA, the Basis Conversion and Development Authority, they also contributed with landing stations and a 250-kilometer cable network. So, really trying to expand internet access.
Which is so important in the digital age.
Absolutely. And I think, that's a good segue into the economic side of things.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the reforms that were put in place.
Yeah. So we have, the TRAIN Act, which is the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Act.
Right.
That reduced income taxes for 99% of taxpayers.
Which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. But also generated, approximately 305 billion pesos in revenue that was supposed to be used for, infrastructure and social programs.
Right. So the idea was to kind of provide some immediate relief, but also fund these key government initiatives.
Yeah. And then following that, there was the CREATE Act, which is the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, which really lowered corporate income tax rates.
Significant.
Yeah, to 20% for MSMEs and 25% for other corporations. And they were projecting, I think, something like 1 trillion pesos in tax relief to, really try to encourage business investment.
So really trying to stimulate the economy.
Yeah, make the Philippines, attractive for businesses.
Exactly.
And then, of course, in agriculture, we have the rice tarification law, which was, aimed at stabilizing rice prices.
A key issue in the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely. And they established that 10 billion peso annual rice competitiveness enhancement fund, or RCEF, for farmers.
Right, which was designed to help farmers become more competitive.
Yeah. And there was also the Free Irrigation Service Act, which benefited over 1 million farmers, and the Agricultural Free Patent Reform Act, which was trying to improve access to financing for farmers. So, a lot of focus on agriculture there.
It seems like it. Really trying to modernize the sector and support farmers.
Yeah. And then, finally, there were those efforts to improve the investment and business environment overall. So we have amendments to the Public Service Act and the Foreign Investments Act, which were, easing restrictions.
Right, opening up to more investment.
Yeah. And then the Ease of Doing Business Act, which was all about streamlining government processes. So, they set those transaction timelines and they implemented that e-bias system.
So really trying to cut the red tape.
Yeah. And I mean, you put it all together, and it's like the highest credit ratings that they ever achieved, the infrastructure spending. They were maintaining that at like 5.1% of GDP in 2021.
That's a big commitment to infrastructure.
It's big. And it really does feel like there was this real ambition to build a stronger foundation for the country.
Yeah. A lot happened in those 6 years.
It did. It really did. So I guess, thinking about it all, what do you think, what single area do you think had the most profound impact on the daily lives of Filipinos?
Oh, that's a tough question.
It's a big question.
I mean, there's so much to consider.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it was the infrastructure? Do you think it was the economic reforms? Or do you think it was something else entirely?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of factors.
That's fair.
But it's definitely something for our listeners to think about.
Yeah. And what other questions does this deep dive raise for you about, the long-term effects of these achievements?
Yeah, I mean, how sustainable are some of these changes?
Right.
What will the long-term impact be?
Yeah. What will it look like in 5 years, in 10 years?
Exactly. And that's what makes this so fascinating to look back on.
Absolutely. It really gives you a lot to consider.
It does.
So thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into the Duterte administration. Until next time.
See you then.